You have a mixture of fans. You have people who can't stand you, and you have people who will always stay by your side no matter what if you're a die-hard fan. I believe that Layla had some die-hard fans out there despite what you may think. But this is going to give Layla the opportunity to come back off the knee injury after several weeks as a full-fledged babyface, give her the opportunity to win some fans back, and possibly become a potential contender for the Divas Championship, which is currently being defended now on both shows, both on Raw and SmackDown, and the Divas Championship is currently being held right now by both the Bella twins, although they like to refer to Brie Bella as the Divas Champion. I believe that both the Bellas can be considered as the Divas Champion because they play a decisive role in the defense of the championship. I think it's only a matter of time before we see Awesome Kong with the Divas Championship, but I think that she's spending the majority of her time right now sidelining Divas and making points. And I think that it was pretty innovative how they threw Michael Cole and Awesome Kong into the whole Layla injury swerve to give Layla an excuse to remain off of television. Obviously, how they're going to play her knee injury out is that she was injured by Awesome Kong in that devastating maneuver, which we saw her execute in TNA. There's also a bit of controversy on the Karma name change. She almost wasn't called Karma. She was actually going to go by her TNA name Awesome Kong before the decision was made by WWE Creative to have her debut as Karma. Kind of an interesting swerve thrown into the Awesome Kong thing. I can see something when Layla comes back off of injury, having both Layla and Kelly given their history with one another from ECW, going up against Awesome Kong, because the inaugural thing that I was trying to decipher was who was Awesome Kong's inaugural program going to be with in WWE, and my assumption was that it was going to be with Kelly. Obviously now, with Layla being sidelined, you can have something between a Raw and a SmackDown Diva, given the involvement of Awesome Kong on both Raw and SmackDown. I know I should be referring to her as Karma, her WWE name, but I like to go back and reflect on the YouTube footage of her in TNA. I think what we're going to see is Karma work a program with a Raw and a SmackDown Diva together, and with Layla now coming back off of an injury, it gives her the opportunity to work with Kelly, which we've seen in the past, to get the Karma thing over. But like I said, Layla's injury is now going to offer an opportunity for a diva who hasn't had an opportunity at the Divas Championship to really step up her game. And there are a number of divas there that I can put a finger on and point a finger towards that haven't had the opportunity to have a push. Rosa Mendes is one of those individuals because of her problem with WWE Creative and WWE Management, where they believed that she had to lose weight before she could get somewhat of a push. I believe she's working hard to do that, debuting a new look and hairstyle, and it seems like she's let off on the sweets and different things and has lost a significant amount of weight. But Rosa Mendes is one individual who I could see really step it off and take advantage of Layla's injury, because it seems like SmackDown is pushing Layla towards being a contender for the Divas Championship currently held by the Bellas, and it would be interesting to see how WWE would go about making her the Divas Champion and having her be a babyface for the first time in years since the days of Extreme Expose. That would have been the last time she would have been a babyface, and the other time would have been when she won the Divas Search back in '06, 5 years ago. She has a 2-year lateness on Michelle McCool. Michelle McCool has a 2-year advantage over her, and there was about 12 or 13 years of experience between both members of Layla. But now with Layla's injury, one of the biggest things is that a diva who hasn't been giving a push, an example would have been Rosa Mendes, is now going to be presented with the opportunity to really step it up, as WWE are going to be putting Layla on the sidelines for several weeks. I see her coming back and doing something with Awesome Kong along with Kelly as part of her injury program. I think they're going to work something into that. But I really like how they took her out of the storylines, having her being attacked by Awesome Kong and be one of Awesome Kong's latest victims. But it's interesting, to see how WWE are putting so much pressure on not just the males, but the females as well, and they're putting so much pressure on the females that the females are getting injured just as severely as the males are. I mean, back in the 90s, it would be very uncommon to hear about a diva being injured. You'd always hear about a male being injured, but never a diva. And now it seems like they're putting a significant amount of pressure not only on the male performers, but on the female performers as well. And I think it's somewhat of an issue that deserves some form of correction. And hopefully WWE Creative will realize that and do something about it. Because when you're seeing a significant amount of females being injured just as much as the males, there is somewhat of a problem that deserves some form of correction. Maybe they're trying to ignore it. Maybe they're realizing, okay, we have to push the females just as much as the males, and injuries are something that's going to happen off and on again with the females just as they are the males. But I think it's an issue that's being overlooked, and when WWE are injuring their females just as much as they are their males, something is wrong, and there's a problem somewhere there in the booking that deserves some form of correction. Maybe they're overshadowing it because they're looking at it in terms of the times are changing, and we have to change with the times, and we have to start pushing our female performers just as much as we are our males. It seems like the pressure was on Kelly on SmackDown last year, and now they're moving that pressure from being on SmackDown over to her on Raw. And now it seems like they're putting a significant amount of pressure on, Layla right now, giving her coming off a program with Michelle McCool. But I think it's a problem that, needs some form of correction. If you're pushing your females to the level of where they're getting hurt as severely as males, something is going wrong, and it needs some form of correction before it becomes a serious problem that is being overlooked a bit too much. I think that every problem in professional wrestling that arises can be corrected. It's just that people are being somewhat lazy and not correcting their problems. And the problem that we have right now is that the divas are being sidelined just as much as the males. And I think that started with the whole NXT Divas installment in Season 3, when they started pushing their divas a little bit too much, and then a lot of injuries came following Season 3, and WWE stuck with the formula of pushing their divas just as much as the males. Now, before NXT Season 3 was ever heard of, the divas were being pushed more than they had been in the 90s because there wasn't somewhat of a divas division. You'd see the occasional Jekyll and Sable match, or the occasional Sable Luna match, or Marlena and Sable mixing it up, or Sunny and Sable, even back as far as 96. But never before have you seen a divas division as competitive as we have seen it now. And I think that one of the things that you can thank, for the competitiveness on the side of the divas division is the TNA Knockouts division, which came into fruition 4 or 5 years ago, and that really forced the divas division to really step up their game. I think it's somewhat of a problem. It needs to be corrected, just as, insurance and the independence needs to be corrected, be it there is none. That's an example of another issue that I've emphasized on a lot here on this radio program. There are a number of issues that deserve some form of correction, and if you don't correct the issues, then you're going to run into more problems. And I hope that WWE realizes this issue before it becomes even more severe than it is. Layla's injury definitely opens up the door for a lot of divas who aren't being pushed, but it also opens up the door for more problems to arise. And if you don't correct these problems, then you're going to run into even more severe problems, and you're not going to know how to correct them, and it's going to give WWE's Divas division a terrible name. Yeah, it's going to show the fans that the Divas are just as hardcore competitors as the males are. But when you're booking your divas in hardcore matches and pushing them to the levels of the male performers, then there is something definitely wrong with the way you're booking your talent. I've noticed that the divas are ending up on the injury reserve list just as much as the males are, perhaps in the past 6 months. And it is something that needs some form of correction and is a severe problem. Now, the listeners out there in Radioland might listen to this program and say, what the fuck is he talking about? He's not making much sense. And you might make a point to ignore my comments towards the amount of injuries that we're seeing handed out to the divas. But when you see something as severe as the divas being injured just as much as the men, you have to realize that either WWE are at a shortage of talent, where they're forcing their male competitors to compete just as hard as the females, and the females just as hard as the males. You're either facing a problem where you have a shortage of talent on your male roster, or you're facing a problem as to where the creative process in WWE has reached a point where we've done everything in the book but push the women to the level of the males, so now we're doing it. The first female to ever be pushed to a limit as a male, in my opinion, was Joanie Laurer as Chyna, formerly of Chyna in WWE, and now Chyna's working for TNA. That was the first. When you'd see males mixing up with the females and what have you. Before that, you'd have the occasional intergender tag team match where the males would compete against the males and the females would compete against the females, and that was sufficient enough. But when Chyna came in the 90s, then you saw Chyna mixing up with Jeff Jarrett and Chris Jericho, and she was the first to do that. And then the next one after that would have probably been Beth Phoenix, who wasn't afraid to mix it up with the male competitors. But now, what you're seeing is the females always getting beat up by the males. You're seeing the females be pushed to the level of the males, and it's a problem. It's an issue that deserves some form of correction, just as something as simple as independent wrestlers needing insurance. Independent wrestlers are competing for independent companies, getting severely injured, having to go to the doctors and lie, tell them that they fell down off of roofs or fell down over the stairs or what have you, because the hospitals and the medical coverage do not pay any attention to independent wrestling. And it's an issue. And an issue of the females getting hurt just as much as the males is a severe issue that I think WWE needs to look at. I mean, sure, WWE will cover all your medical expenses, and that's a beneficiary when you're a WWE performer. You have all your medical expenses covered when it comes to a severe injury or a surgery. When a surgery is required, WWE will step it up and, cover your medical expenses. But when it comes to, female performers being injured just as much as the males, I think that it is an issue that deserves some form of correction, just as something as simple as something going on in the independent level. But yeah, it's going to take time for WWE obviously to realize this issue, and when they finally realize it to the level of it needs some form of correction, then it will be corrected. But as long as you overshadow something as severe as a female being injured just as much as a male competitor, then you're not going to have any form of correction and some form of finality. But it's an issue I thought that I would raise here for this week's installment of HEW Entertainment Variety Radio. And if you have an opinion on the females being injured just as much as the male competitors,